The lunch crowd at Romano's Italian restaurant was buzzing with the usual energy of a Thursday afternoon. Business people sat hunched over their laptops. College students shared plates of pasta, and elderly couples enjoyed their weekly tradition of splitting a pizza. The smell of garlic bread and fresh basil filled the air, mixing with the sound of clinking plates and dozens of overlapping conversations. Behind the hostess stand, 23-year-old Lisa was organizing menus when the front door swung open. She looked up with her practiced smile, ready to greet another customer, but the words caught in her throat. The woman who walked in looked like she'd been living on the streets for months, maybe years. Her gray hair hung in tangled knots around her face, unwashed and matted. She wore a men's coat that was so oversized it practically swallowed her thin frame, and the fabric was covered in stains that told stories of sleeping on sidewalks and digging through dumpsters. Her jeans were torn at both knees, not in the fashionable way, but in the way that comes from wearing the same pair every single day until they simply give out. On her feet were sneakers held together with duct tape. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. She'd been trained for situations like this. The owner, Vincent, had been clear about the policy. Be kind but firm. Offer to call a shelter if needed. But don't let homeless people stay in the restaurant because it makes paying customers uncomfortable. The woman moved slowly toward the hostess stand, and Lisa noticed that despite her appearance, she held herself with a strange kind of dignity. Her back was straight, her steps deliberate, and when she finally looked up, her blue eyes were clear and surprisingly gentle. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. Her voice was cultured, with perfect pronunciation that seemed completely at odds with her appearance. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you during your busy lunch service." Lisa blinked, surprised by the formal way she spoke. Most people who came in asking for help were either aggressive or desperately apologetic. This woman was neither. She was simply polite, as if she were a regular customer asking for a table. "I haven't eaten in 2 days," the woman continued, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "I was walking past your restaurant when I saw the piano in the corner through the window. It's a beautiful instrument. A Steinway, if I'm not mistaken." Lisa glanced back at the grand piano that sat near the far wall. It was Vincent's pride and joy, purchased at an estate sale 3 years ago. He'd had dreams of hiring a pianist to play during dinner service, creating an elegant atmosphere. But it had never worked out, and now the piano just sat there. A very expensive piece of furniture that no one ever touched. "Yes, it's a Steinway," Lisa said carefully, unsure where this conversation was going. The woman's eyes lit up for just a moment, a flash of something that looked like joy or maybe longing. "I was wondering," she said, her voice growing even softer, "if I might play it for you. Just one piece. And in exchange, perhaps I could have something to eat. Anything at all. Even just some bread would be wonderful." The request was so unexpected that Lisa didn't know how to respond. She stood there, mouth slightly open, trying to process what she'd just heard. Behind her, several customers had noticed the homeless woman and were whispering to each other. One man nudged his wife and nodded toward the front of the restaurant with a smirk on his face. I don't think," Lisa started, but she was interrupted by Vincent's voice. "What's going on here?" The owner had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a large man in his 50s with a thick mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing in his restaurant. He took one look at the homeless woman and his expression hardened. The woman turned to face him, and again, Lisa was struck by how composed she seemed. There was no shame in her posture, no desperate pleading in her eyes. She simply repeated her request word for word as if she were making the most reasonable offer in the world. Vincent's response was immediate. "The piano isn't for public use. It's a display piece." His tone was firm but not cruel. "But tell you what, I'll have the kitchen make you a plate of spaghetti. You can eat it at the back table and then you'll need to move along. We can't have—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We need to maintain a certain atmosphere for our customers." Around the restaurant, several people had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. Lisa saw a table of young guys in business suits trying to suppress their laughter. One of them whispered something to his friends and they all snickered. An older woman at a nearby table was shaking her head with a disapproving frown, though whether she disapproved of the homeless woman or of Vincent's response was unclear. But the woman didn't move toward the back table. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on Vincent with quiet intensity. "Sir, I understand your concern, but I promise you I won't disturb anyone. I'll play one piece, something beautiful and brief, and then I'll eat quietly and leave immediately afterward. You have my word." There was something in the way she said it that made Vincent hesitate. Maybe it was the unexpected elegance of her speech. Maybe it was the complete absence of desperation despite her obvious hunger. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something in her eyes that suggested she wasn't just another person down on their luck, but someone with a story that ran deeper than her current circumstances revealed. "Please," she added, and that single word carried so much weight that the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Vincent looked at Lisa, who gave a tiny shrug. He looked at the piano, then back at the woman. Several more customers had noticed the standoff now, and the dining room had grown quieter as people strained to hear what was being said. "Fine," Vincent finally said, sighing deeply. "One song. Then you eat, and then you leave without causing any trouble. Deal?" "Deal," the woman said, and for the first time a small smile crossed her weathered face. Vincent gestured toward the piano, and the woman began walking across the restaurant floor. Every eye in the place followed her. The business guys at their table were grinning now, elbowing each other and clearly expecting some kind of entertainment. One of them pulled out his phone, ready to record what he assumed would be a disaster worth sharing online. "This is going to be hilarious," he muttered to his friends, just loud enough for others to hear. Another person at a different table chuckled in agreement. The woman seemed completely unaware of or unbothered by their reactions. She moved through the restaurant like she was walking through a concert hall, her focus entirely on the piano waiting for her. When she reached it, she stood for a moment, just looking at the keys, her hand hovering above them without touching. She closed her eyes and took a long, slow breath. Then she sat down on the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The restaurant was silent now, everyone watching, some with curiosity, some with amusement, some with pity. Vincent stood by the kitchen door with his arms crossed. Lisa remained at the hostess stand, her heart beating faster for reasons she couldn't quite explain. The woman opened her eyes, looked down at the keyboard, and began to play. The first note hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Then came the second and the third, and suddenly the entire restaurant was filled with music that nobody had expected. It wasn't a simple melody. It wasn't Chopsticks or Happy Birthday or any of the basic tunes that most people knew. This was Rachmaninoff, one of the most complex and emotionally demanding pieces ever written for piano. The woman's fingers moved across the keys with impossible speed and precision, her whole body swaying slightly as she played. The business guys at their table stopped laughing. One of them had been holding his phone up to record, expecting to capture something funny to share with his friends later. But now his hand slowly lowered, the phone forgotten, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Lisa felt goosebumps rising on her arms. She'd heard recorded piano music before, of course. She'd been to a concert once in high school. But this was different. This wasn't just someone playing notes correctly. This was something else entirely. Each note seemed to carry its own emotion, its own story. The music swelled and dipped, sometimes thundering with power, sometimes barely a whisper, so delicate you had to hold your breath to hear it. At table 12, a middle-aged woman named Patricia had been in the middle of twirling spaghetti onto her fork. The fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She sat frozen, listening, and then, without understanding why, tears began streaming down her face. Her husband reached over and took her hand, his own eyes glistening. Vincent had moved from the kitchen door and was now standing against the wall, his arms no longer crossed but hanging at his sides. His mouth was slightly open, his breathing shallow. He'd owned this restaurant for 20 years. He'd heard thousands of songs on the radio, playing in the background while he cooked and served and managed his business. But he'd never heard anything like this, never felt music in his chest like a physical force. The college students who'd been studying with earbuds in had pulled them out, their textbooks forgotten. An elderly man who came in every Thursday for the early bird special was crying openly, not bothering to wipe his eyes. A mother with 2 young children had been trying to keep them quiet and entertained, but now even the kids were still, watching the strange homeless lady make magic happen. The woman kept playing, her eyes closed now, completely lost in the music. Her fingers flew across the keys with the kind of skill that takes decades to develop. This wasn't the playing of someone who'd taken a few lessons as a child. This was mastery. This was the kind of talent that separated amateurs from professionals, professionals from virtuosos. Lisa found herself crying and didn't even know when the tears had started. She worked here 5 days a week. She knew every item on the menu, every scratch on the tables, every quirk of the old espresso machine. This was just her job, just the place she came to earn money for college. But right now, in this moment, it felt like the most important place in the entire world. The music built to a crescendo, the woman's whole body involved in the performance now. Her shoulders rose and fell, her head tilted back, her fingers dancing across the keys so fast they were almost a blur. The power of it filled every corner of the restaurant, seemed to vibrate in the walls themselves. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the piece ended with a final gentle note that faded into silence. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic outside. It was as if everyone had been transported somewhere else and was now slowly coming back to reality, trying to remember where they were and what had just happened. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly man, his weathered hands coming together in applause that sounded thunderous in the silence. Within seconds, everyone joined in. The entire restaurant erupted in applause, people standing up from their tables, some wiping their eyes, others shaking their heads in amazement. The woman opened her eyes slowly, looking confused, almost startled. She glanced around at all the people clapping for her, and something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or memory, or loss. She stood up from the piano bench quickly, smoothing down her oversized coat with shaking hands. Vincent was the first to reach her, moving across the restaurant faster than Lisa had ever seen him move. "That was—" he started, then stopped, unable to find the words. "Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that?" The woman smiled sadly, a smile that held more sorrow than joy. "That doesn't matter anymore," she said quietly. "Thank you for letting me play. Now, if you could spare that plate of spaghetti, I'll eat quickly and get out of your way." "No," Vincent said firmly. "No, you'll have whatever you want from the menu. Anything at all. On the house. And please take your time." He led her to the best table in the restaurant, right by the window where the afternoon sun streamed in. Other customers kept glancing over at her, some trying to be subtle about it, others openly staring. The business guys were talking in hushed, excited voices, all traces of their earlier mockery gone. One of them kept shaking his head, saying, "Incredible," over and over. Vincent told the kitchen to prepare their best dish, the special that wasn't even on the regular menu. While they waited, Lisa brought over bread and olive oil, her hands still trembling slightly. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said softly. The woman looked up at her with those clear blue eyes. "Thank you, dear. You're very kind. Have you played professionally? Are you a concert pianist?" Something dark passed over the woman's face. "I was," she said after a pause. "A very long time ago. But that life is behind me now." Before Lisa could ask more questions, Vincent returned with his phone in his hand. "I recorded the last part of it," he said, his voice excited. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't not capture it. Would it be okay if I shared it? People need to hear this. The world needs to hear this." The woman hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin in her lap. "I suppose it doesn't matter anymore," she said finally. "Share it if you like. But please, I'd rather not have my name attached to it. Just let the music speak for itself." Vincent nodded, though Lisa could see he was burning with curiosity. They all were. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? How had someone with this much talent ended up homeless, hungry, playing piano in a random restaurant for a plate of food? The meal arrived, and the woman ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was the finest thing she'd ever tasted. Maybe it was, after 2 days of not eating. The restaurant had returned to normal volume, but the atmosphere had changed. People spoke more quietly, more thoughtfully. Several customers stopped by the woman's table to thank her, to tell her how much the music had moved them. When she finished eating, she stood to leave. Vincent tried to get her to stay, asked if she needed a place to sleep, if he could help her in any way. But she politely declined everything except a piece of chocolate cake wrapped to go, which she accepted with a gracious smile. "Will you come back?" Lisa asked as the woman headed toward the door. "Please, will you play for us again?" The woman paused, her hand on the door handle. "Perhaps," she said, "if the music calls me again." And then she was gone, disappearing into the afternoon crowd on the sidewalk, leaving behind a restaurant full of people who felt like they'd witnessed something miraculous. Vincent looked at his phone, at the video he'd recorded. It was shaky and didn't capture the beginning, but it had the power, the emotion, the ending. Without really thinking about it, he opened the restaurant's social media page and uploaded it with a simple caption. "A woman walked into our restaurant today and played like an angel. Who is she?" He hit post and set his phone down, not expecting much. It was just a video. Just a moment. How could he have known that by morning everything would change? Vincent barely slept that night. He kept checking his phone, watching the numbers climb. At 10 o'clock, the video had 200 views. Not bad for a small restaurant account that usually got maybe 30 likes on a post about the daily special. By midnight, it was at 5,000. He refreshed the page, thinking there must be some mistake. 5 minutes later, 8,000. He called Lisa, even though it was late. "Are you seeing this?" he asked when she answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "Seeing what?" "The video. It's going crazy. People are sharing it everywhere." Lisa pulled up the restaurant's page on her phone and gasped. The comments were flooding in faster than she could read them. People from Italy, Japan, Australia, Brazil, hundreds of comments in dozens of languages, but the message was always the same. Beautiful, incredible. Who is she? By the time Vincent arrived at the restaurant the next morning, the video had 500,000 views. His hand shook as he unlocked the front door. His phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 in the morning. News stations, radio shows, magazines. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious pianist. The lunch shift was unlike anything Vincent had ever experienced. The restaurant was packed by 11:30, an hour before they usually got busy. But these weren't the regular customers. These were people who'd seen the video, who wanted to sit in the same room where that music had happened, who hoped maybe the woman would come back. Lisa was overwhelmed at the hostess stand, taking names for a waiting list that kept growing longer. "Do you think she'll return today?" People kept asking. "What time did she come yesterday?" "I don't know," Lisa answered honestly. She didn't say. By day 2, the video had 5 million views. A man in an expensive suit showed up claiming to be a talent agent. A woman from a major record label wanted first rights to sign the mystery pianist. The phone rang so constantly that Vincent had to unplug it just to think straight. But it was the comments that really got to him. He sat in his office during a rare, quiet moment, scrolling through thousands of messages. People were sharing their own stories. A woman wrote about how she'd been ready to end her life that morning, but heard the video and decided to hold on for one more day. A veteran said he hadn't cried since the war, but this music broke through something in him he thought was dead. A teenage girl said she'd been about to quit piano lessons after 10 years, but now she remembered why she'd started. And then there were the other comments. The ones from people who thought they recognized the playing style, the music professors and classical enthusiasts who were starting to put pieces together. That technique, I've only seen one person play Rachmaninoff like that. The way she phrases the crescendo in the middle section. I know this playing, could it be? After all these years? One comment in particular made Vincent's heart race. It was from someone with the username Classical Music Archives, and it had been liked thousands of times. "I'm 90% certain this is Helen Reeves. She was a prodigy in the 1980s, performed at Carnegie Hall at 16, was being called the greatest pianist of her generation. Then she vanished in 1996. Nobody knows what happened to her. If this is really her, my God, where has she been?" Vincent Googled the name immediately. Helen Reeves. The search results showed old newspaper articles, grainy photos from the 80s and 90s. A young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, elegant in concert dresses, her hands poised over piano keys. The photos were old, the resolution poor, but there was something about the eyes, something about the way she held herself. He pulled up the video again, paused it on the clearest frame of the homeless woman's face. Could it be? After 30 years of aging, of hardship, of living on the streets, could this be the same person? More articles populated his screen. Helen Reeves had been incredible. Critics had written that she played with an emotional depth that defied her age. She'd been offered positions at prestigious music schools, had recording contracts lined up, had a career that seemed limitless, and then in 1996, she'd canceled all her performances and disappeared completely from public life. There were theories, of course. Some articles speculated about a nervous breakdown. Others hinted at a personal tragedy. But nobody knew for certain. She'd simply vanished. and the classical music world had mourned the loss of what could have been one of the greatest careers in piano history. Vincent tried to focus on running his restaurant, but it was impossible. News crews had started showing up, parking their vans outside, their reporters asking for interviews. He gave a few, always saying the same thing. "I don't know who she is. She asked to play for a meal, and I said yes. That's all I know." But inside, he was desperate to find out. If this was really Helen Reeves, she was living on the streets. She was hungry. She was alone. How had this happened? Why had it happened? Day 3 brought 20 million views. The video had been shared by celebrities, picked up by major news networks, translated and subtitled into dozens of languages. Vincent's small Italian restaurant had become world famous overnight. His reservations were booked solid for the next 2 months, with people hoping to be there if the woman returned. Lisa found herself watching the door constantly during her shifts, hoping to see that oversized coat, that tangled gray hair. Other staff members did the same. Even the kitchen crew kept peeking out, hoping for a glimpse of the woman who'd turned their ordinary Thursday into something extraordinary. The internet had become obsessed with solving the mystery. Amateur detectives were comparing the video to old footage of Helen Reeves performing. Musicians were analyzing the technique, the style, the specific way she played certain passages. A few people claimed it couldn't possibly be the same person, but more and more experts were becoming convinced that it was. The way she approaches the third movement is identical to Reeves's interpretation from her 1992 Boston performance, wrote a music professor from a major university. Nobody else plays it quite like that. The spacing, the emphasis, the emotional timing. This has to be her. Vincent had printed out an old photo of young Helen Reeves and kept it in his office. He'd stare at it during breaks, trying to see the homeless woman in those youthful features. The more he looked, the more certain he became. The shape of the eyes, the way she held her head, even the hands, still elegant despite years of hardship. On the morning of day 4, Vincent arrived at the restaurant to find over 50 people waiting outside before opening time. Some had cameras, some had flowers, some just wanted to be there, to sit in the space where that music had happened, to be part of the story. He went through the motions of preparing for service, but his mind was elsewhere. Would she come back? Did she know about the video? Was she somewhere out there hiding, afraid of being found? At 2:45 in the afternoon, exactly the same time she'd arrived before, Vincent glanced at the front door out of habit. His heart stopped. She was there. The woman stood outside the glass door, looking in at the crowded restaurant with wide, frightened eyes. She could see the cameras, the people, the chaos. She took a step backward, clearly about to leave. Vincent moved faster than he'd thought possible. He wove through tables, past surprised customers, and pushed through the front door into the afternoon sunlight. "Please," he said, slightly out of breath. "Please don't go." She looked at him with those clear blue eyes, and he saw fear there. Real fear. "I saw the video," she said quietly. I didn't expect—" "I know," Vincent said gently. "I'm sorry. I should have asked before posting it. But please come inside." "Not for them." He gestured back at the restaurant. "For me, just to talk. Just you and me. I promise." She hesitated, her thin frame almost trembling. Then slowly, she nodded. Vincent led her not into the main dining room but through the kitchen to his small office in the back. He closed the door, shutting out the noise and the chaos in the world. He pulled out a chair for her and she sat down carefully, like someone who wasn't used to kindness anymore. "Are you Helen Reeves?" he asked gently. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then finally she nodded. "I was," she whispered. "A very long time ago." Helen sat in the small office chair, her weathered hands folded in her lap. Vincent pulled up another chair and sat across from her, close enough to talk quietly, but far enough to give her space. Outside the door he could hear the muffled sounds of the restaurant, but in here it was just the two of them. "You don't have to tell me anything," Vincent said gently. "But I want you to know that whatever happened, whatever brought you here, I'm not judging. Nobody out there is judging either. They just want to understand." Helen's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She'd gotten good at not crying over the years. Tears didn't help when you were sleeping in doorways. They didn't make the hunger go away or the cold nights warmer. So she'd learned to push them down, to keep moving forward without looking back. But something about this quiet office, about Vincent's kind face, about being recognized after so many years of being invisible. Broke something open inside her. "I had a daughter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grace, she was 7 years old. The most beautiful child you've ever seen, with curly hair and a laugh that sounded like music." Helen smiled at the memory, even as a tear escaped down her cheek. "She loved when I played piano. She'd sit right next to me on the bench watching my hands, trying to copy what I did." Vincent waited, not rushing her, just listening. "My husband Daniel, he was a teacher. High school English. We weren't rich, but we were happy. So happy." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was performing constantly back then. Carnegie Hall, Symphony Hall in Boston, venues across Europe. Everyone said I had this incredible career ahead of me. But the best part of my day was always coming home to them." She paused, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair. Vincent noticed her knuckles turning white. It was a Tuesday night in November. I'd just gotten back from a performance in Philadelphia. Daniel had taken Grace to the store to buy ingredients for my favorite soup. They wanted to surprise me. Her breathing became shallow. A drunk driver ran a red light. "Hit them head on." They died before the ambulance even arrived. "I'm so sorry," Vincent said, his own eyes filling with tears. Helen nodded slowly. "I was 28 years old. One phone call and my entire world ended. I couldn't process it. Couldn't accept it. For weeks I walked around in a fog, waiting for them to come home, waiting to wake up from the nightmare." She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. "I tried to go back to performing. I had concerts scheduled, contracts to fulfill. But every time I sat at the piano, all I could see was Grace's little face watching me play. All I could hear was Daniel clapping from the audience. The music that used to bring me joy became a reminder of everything I'd lost." Vincent handed her a tissue from the box on his desk. She took it gratefully. "I canceled everything. The performances, the teaching position I'd been offered at a conservatory, the recording contract. My agent tried to convince me to take time off and come back when I was ready. But I knew I'd never be ready. How could I stand on a stage and play beautiful music when there was nothing beautiful left in the world? The grief consumed me," she continued. "I stopped eating properly. Stopped sleeping. I'd spend entire days just sitting in their rooms, holding Grace's stuffed animals, reading Daniel's favorite books. My friends tried to help, but I pushed them all away. I didn't want help. I wanted my family back, and since I couldn't have that, I didn't want anything." She took a shaky breath. "I spent all my savings on therapy, on medications for depression and anxiety. Nothing helped. The apartment was full of memories. Every corner held a ghost. I couldn't afford the rent anymore without performing, and I couldn't perform, so I lost the apartment." Vincent felt his heart breaking as he listened. "At first I stayed with friends, but I was so broken, so lost in my grief that I became a burden. I could see it in their eyes, the relief when I finally left. I ended up in shelters, then on the streets. That was 15 years ago." "15 years," Vincent repeated, unable to hide his shock. Helen nodded. "I moved from city to city. Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, here. Sometimes I'd find a shelter with a bed. Sometimes I'd sleep in bus stations or under bridges. I learned which restaurants threw out food at the end of the night, which churches served free meals, how to stay warm in winter. But the music never completely left me. Every few months something would pull at me. I'd see a piano in a church or a community center, and I'd feel this ache in my chest. Sometimes I'd play, just for a few minutes when no one was around. It hurt too much to play for long. But I couldn't completely stay away either." She looked up at Vincent. "Last Thursday was Grace's birthday. She would have been 37 years old. I was walking past your restaurant feeling so empty, so lost and missing her. And then I saw the piano through your window. It was like she was calling to me, telling me it was okay to play again. Just once, just for her." Vincent wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm glad you came in. I'm glad I said yes. I didn't know you recorded it," Helen said. "I didn't know it would become this thing. I saw it on someone's phone yesterday. They were watching it on the bus and I was sitting right there, and they had no idea they were looking at me." She laughed, but it was a sad sound. "I've become so invisible that people can't recognize me even when I'm right in front of them." "You're not invisible," Vincent said firmly. "Not anymore. And Helen, I know this is overwhelming, but there are people who want to help, real help. Not just charity, but real opportunities." Helen shook her head. I can't go back to that life. I can't perform again. I can't not performing, Vincent interrupted gently. Teaching. There's a music school that's reached out. They saw the video. They want to offer you a position teaching piano. It comes with a small apartment, a salary, health insurance. No pressure to perform. Just sharing your gift with students who want to learn. Helen stared at him. Why would they want me? I'm homeless. I'm broken. I haven't taught anyone in 3 decades. Because you're Helen Reeves, Vincent said simply. Because you played one piece in a restaurant and reminded 20 million people why music matters. Because despite everything you've lost, everything you've been through, you still have that gift. And there are kids out there who need a teacher who understands that music isn't just about technique. It's about emotion. It's about survival. It's about remembering the people we love. Helen was quiet for a long time. Outside, Vincent could hear someone calling for him, probably wondering where he'd disappeared to. But he didn't move. This moment was more important than anything else. I'm scared, Helen finally whispered. I've been invisible for so long. I don't know if I remember how to be seen. You don't have to decide right now, Vincent said. But will you at least stay for dinner? Let me introduce you to some people. Not as Helen Reeves, the famous pianist, but as Helen, a person who deserves kindness and a chance to start again. She looked at him with those clear blue eyes, and slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. Okay, she said. Just dinner. Just to see? Vincent smiled and stood up, offering her his hand. She took it, and he helped her to her feet. Together they walked toward the office door, toward the noise and light of the restaurant, toward a future that neither of them could quite imagine yet. Vincent kept his promise. He didn't parade Helen through the dining room or announce who she was. Instead, he had Lisa quietly clear out a corner booth, away from the cameras and the curious stares. He brought Helen a menu and told her to order anything she wanted, everything she wanted. While she ate, Vincent made some phone calls. The music school director said she could come by tomorrow, no pressure, just to see the place. A therapist who'd seen the video and specialized in grief counseling offered her services free of charge. A woman who ran a shelter called to say they had a private room available for as long as Helen needed it. When Vincent returned to the booth with a notepad full of names and numbers, Helen was staring out the window at the street where she'd spent so many nights sleeping on benches and in doorways. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly. What if I fail? What if I let everyone down? Then you fail, Vincent said, sliding into the booth across from her. And you try again. That's what people do. But Helen, living on the streets, that's failing too. At least this way. You're failing with a roof over your head and people who care about you. She laughed despite herself, a real laugh that surprised them both. You're very persistent. It's kept my restaurant running for 20 years, he said with a grin. I don't give up easily. Over the next few days, Helen took small steps. She visited the music school, a beautiful old building with practice rooms that smelled like wood polish and sheet music. The director, an older man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, showed her around without any pressure. We're not asking you to be who you were, he told her. We're asking you to be who you are now. Someone with knowledge to share. Someone who understands that music can save lives because it saved yours. Helen met with the therapist, a woman named Dr. Chen who didn't try to fix her or rush her healing. She just listened week after week, as Helen talked about Daniel and Grace, about the years on the streets, about the shame and the grief and the fear of hoping again. She stayed at the shelter, where the staff treated her with dignity and helped her get new clothes, a proper ID, and all the documentation she'd lost over the years of homelessness. Slowly, the woman who'd walked into Romano's restaurant in a torn coat and tangled hair began to look more like the person she'd once been. But the most important change was happening inside. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Vincent asked Helen if she'd be willing to play at the restaurant again. Not for the cameras or the crowds, but for a special event he was organizing. I want to do a benefit concert, he explained. All the money goes to programs that help homeless people, especially those dealing with grief and trauma. You don't have to perform if you're not ready. But if you are, I think it would mean something. Helen was terrified. Her hands shook when she thought about sitting at that piano again with people watching. But Dr. Chen helped her work through the fear. You're not performing for them, the therapist reminded her. You're playing for Grace, for Daniel, for yourself. Everything else is just noise. The night of the benefit concert, Romano's was transformed. Vincent had rented extra chairs, set up proper lighting, and moved tables to create a small concert space. Over 300 people crowded into the restaurant and spilled onto the sidewalk outside. News crews waited respectfully at the back. Musicians and music students sat with notebooks. And scattered throughout the crowd were people who'd been homeless themselves, who'd seen the video and found hope in Helen's story. Lisa found Helen backstage in Vincent's office, pacing nervously. "You don't have to do this," Lisa said gently. "Nobody will think less of you if you can't." "I know," Helen replied, "but I think I need to. Not for them. For me." When Vincent introduced her, he kept it simple. 15 years ago, this woman lost everything that mattered to her. And 3 weeks ago, she walked into my restaurant and reminded all of us what it means to survive, to endure, to find beauty even in the darkest places. Please welcome Helen Reeves. The applause was thunderous, but Helen barely heard it. She walked to the piano the same Steinway she'd played that first day and sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Then she closed her eyes and began to play. She started with the same Rachmaninoff piece from the viral video, and the crowd fell silent. But this time Helen wasn't playing through pain. She was playing through it, beyond it. Each note carried the weight of her grief, but also the strength of her survival. The music swelled and dipped, powerful and delicate, devastating and hopeful all at once. When she finished the Rachmaninoff, she didn't stop. She played Chopin, then Beethoven, and then something nobody expected. She began to play her own composition, a piece she'd written in her mind during those long homeless nights when she had no piano to touch. She called it Grace's Lullaby. It was the song she used to hum to her daughter at bedtime, transformed into a full piano piece. It was simple and complex at once, heartbreaking and beautiful. As she played, tears streamed down her face, but she kept going. This was her goodbye, her love letter, her way of finally letting herself remember without being destroyed by the memories. In the audience, there wasn't a dry eye. Patricia, the woman who'd cried during the first performance, was sobbing openly. The business guys who'd once laughed at Helen stood with their hands over their hearts. Vincent had his arm around Lisa, both of them crying. When Helen played the final note, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the applause began, but it was different from before. People stood not just to clap, but to honor her courage, her survival, her willingness to share her broken heart with strangers. Helen stood and faced the crowd, and for the first time in 15 years, she bowed, not as the prodigy who'd performed at Carnegie Hall, not as the famous pianist who'd disappeared, but as Helen, a woman who'd lost everything and found a way to keep living anyway. The benefit raised over $50,000 that night. The video of her performance was shared millions of times again, but this time with her full story, her permission, her voice included. 6 months later, Helen had her own small apartment near the music school. It wasn't fancy, just a studio with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom that actually had hot water. But to her, it was a palace. She taught piano 4 days a week to students who ranged from beginners to advanced players. Her teaching style was different from other instructors. She didn't just focus on technique. She taught her students that music was a language for things that couldn't be said with words. One of her students was a teenager who'd lost her mother to cancer. Another was a veteran dealing with trauma. A third was a kid from a rough neighborhood who'd never thought classical music was for someone like him. Helen understood all of them because she'd been broken too. She still went to Romano's every Thursday afternoon. Vincent always kept that time slot open for her. Sometimes she played for the lunch crowd. Sometimes she just sat at her favorite table, eating pasta and talking with Lisa about ordinary things like the weather and bad movies, and whether the tiramisu was better this week than last week. On what would have been Grace's 38th birthday, Helen sat at the piano in her apartment, a small upright she'd been able to afford with her teaching salary. She played Grace's Lullaby quietly, just for herself, just for the daughter who would always be 7 years old in her heart. And for the first time since that terrible November night so many years ago when she finished playing, Helen smiled. Not a sad smile, not a broken smile, just a smile of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable and found reasons to keep going. The music hadn't saved her that day in the restaurant. She'd saved herself, but the music had reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of creating beauty, still worthy of being seen and heard and valued. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Outside her window, the city buzzed with life. People rushed to work, children played in the park, couples held hands on their way to dinner. Helen was part of that world again. Not the famous pianist, not the tragic story, just Helen, a piano teacher who'd once asked for a piece of lunch and been given a second chance at life.